My name is Harold Mitchell, and if you're hearing this story, it means I finally managed to do the right thing. It took me 55 years and a death sentence to understand that sometimes being loyal can be the greatest betrayal of all, a betrayal of your own conscience. I was born in 1968 in a small apartment in Hialeah, the son of James Mitchell, a construction worker, and Mary Mitchell, who cleaned office buildings at night to help support the family. I grew up watching my father come home with calloused hands and an aching back, whispering to my mother about the poor conditions at construction sites. One day he would say, "Someone will actually care about who builds these homes and how they're built." Maybe it was those nighttime talks that planted in me the seed of what I thought was my calling. At 18, when I earned a partial scholarship to study accounting at Florida International University, I dreamed of working in construction, not for the glamour or the money, but because I wanted to be a part of something that truly mattered, giving decent housing to families like mine. During college, I worked during the day as an administrative assistant at small businesses and studied at night. While my classmates went to parties, I stayed up late reviewing spreadsheets and learning every detail about material costs, payroll, and federal regulations. I had no time for dating or a social life. Numbers were my only company, and I loved the mathematical precision of a perfectly balanced ledger. It was in 1998, at the age of 30, that I received a phone call that would change my life. Richard Blackwood, owner of Sunshine Development, had heard about my work through a professor at the university. "Harold," he said, with that deep, confident voice I would come to respect, "I need someone who understands that construction isn't just about profit. It's about purpose." The interview took place at the Sunshine Development Office, a mirrored glass building on Brickell Avenue that reflected Miami's skyline. Richard was 45 at the time, with neatly combed gray hair and a firm handshake that exuded authority. Beside him was Victoria, his wife, an elegant woman with piercing blue eyes who smiled in a calculated way. And Marcus, their teenage son, who already showed the typical arrogance of the privileged. "Our company is different," Richard explained in that first meeting. 90% of our revenue comes from federal contracts for affordable housing. We build homes for low-income families, war veterans, immigrants who came here chasing the American dream. We're not just another construction company, Harold. We're agents of social transformation. His words hit exactly the note I'd always wanted to hear. Finally, I thought, I had found a company that shared the values my father had taught me. I accepted the position of senior accountant with a modest salary, but with the promise that I'd be contributing to something greater than just numbers on a spreadsheet.
The early years at Sunshine Development were the most fulfilling of my professional life. I worked from 7 in the morning to 7 at night, meticulously organizing every financial aspect of the housing projects. Every invoice, every contract, every report to the Department of Housing and Urban Development went through my hands. Richard trusted me completely, giving me access to all of the company's accounts and treating me like a member of the family. On weekends, I visited construction sites to better understand how the money I managed was turning into reality. Seeing entire families moving into new apartments, kids playing in the playgrounds we had included in our designs, elderly folks finally having a safe place to live, all of it gave meaning to the endless numbers I processed every day. I never got married. I had a few relationships over the years, but I always prioritized work. My social life consisted of the occasional dinner at the Blackwoods home where Richard introduced me as the man who helped our company grow, and Victoria always made my favorite dish, chicken lasagna with extra cheese. Marcus, who grew up before my eyes, affectionately called me Uncle Harold and often asked me for help with his math homework. My only real family were my two cats, Newton and Pascal, names I chose in honor of the mathematicians I admired. I lived in a small but well-organized apartment in Coral Gables where every book had its place and every bill was always paid on time. It was a simple life, but I considered it complete. Until in 2015, when I turned 47, Richard promoted me to financial controller, a position that gave me full authority over all of the company's accounting operations. "Harold," he said during the promotion ceremony, "you're not just our accountant, you're the guardian of our financial integrity." Victoria applauded enthusiastically, and Marcus, who now 32 and freshly graduated in business, congratulated me with genuine respect. It was also in 2015 that we hired Carmen Vega as my assistant. She was a brilliant 26-year-old, the daughter of Pedro and Maria Vega, Honduran immigrants who had arrived in the United States 15 years earlier. What impressed me most about Carmen wasn't just her exceptional skill with numbers, but her genuine passion for the work we did. "Mr. Mitchell," she said on her first day, "my parents live in one of the housing developments Sunshine built in 2010. Every day I see how our work here changes real lives. I want to be part of that." Her sincerity reminded me of myself 20 years earlier, and she quickly became not just my assistant, but the daughter I never had. Carmen brought meticulous care to every detail, questioning discrepancies I sometimes overlooked, and always making sure our numbers accurately reflected the reality of our projects. She was the one who insisted on visiting construction sites to see firsthand where our money is going, a habit I had abandoned over the years. For 8 years, I lived believing I was in the right place, doing the right thing, surrounded by the right people. Sunshine Development wasn't just my job, it was my identity, my purpose, my chosen family. Until one March morning in 2023, when a sharp pain in my abdomen changed everything forever.
The pain started as a dull ache on the right side of my abdomen, something I initially attributed to the stress of closing the February books. But when it intensified to the point where I doubled over my desk during a meeting with federal auditors, Richard insisted I see a doctor immediately. "Harold, you're indispensable to us," he said, placing a genuinely concerned hand on my shoulder. "I'm not going to let you neglect your health. Go to the doctor today and use the company's premium health plan. I want you to have the best care possible." The diagnosis hit like a bolt from the blue. Advanced hepatocellular carcinoma, liver cancer, with metastases already spreading. Dr. James Peterson, a renowned oncologist at Baptist Hospital, was blunt. "Harold, with aggressive treatment, you could have between 8 and 12 months. Without treatment, maybe 4. Richard was genuinely devastated by the news. That same day, he rearranged my work schedule to allow me to work from home 3 days a week and come into the office only for essential meetings. Victoria called me weekly to check on my treatment, and Marcus constantly sent messages of support. "Uncle Harold," Marcus said during a visit to my apartment, "if you need anything, just call. We're family, remember?" The sincerity in his eyes made me believe that no matter what happened to me, I would leave this world surrounded by people who truly cared. Chemotherapy was brutal. I woke up every day at 5 in the morning, nauseous and exhausted, but I forced myself to keep working because I knew the housing projects depended on my oversight. From my home office, connected remotely to the company's systems, I began to notice the first discrepancies.
At first, they were minor inconsistencies that any seasoned accountant would spot. Invoices for materials priced slightly above expectations. Purchase orders for quantities of cement that seemed excessive for the size of the projects. Payments to subcontractors I didn't recall approving. "Carmen," I said during one of our weekly video calls, "can you check these invoices from Miami Steel Supply? The numbers aren't matching our original budgets." Carmen, always diligent, spent days analyzing the documents. What she discovered was deeply disturbing. "Mr. Mitchell," she said hesitantly, "these materials are being delivered to addresses different from our construction sites, and the quality specified in the purchase orders doesn't match what's actually being used in the builds." My first reaction was disbelief. Surely this was some kind of misunderstanding, some miscommunication between departments. Richard had always been meticulous about quality and transparency. I asked Carmen to schedule a meeting with him so we could clarify some things. "Richard, Carmen found some discrepancies with the materials, nothing alarming. But I'd like you to clarify a few points so we can keep our HUD reports completely accurate." His reaction was odd. For the first time in 25 years, I saw Richard visibly nervous. "Harold, you know how complicated it is to coordinate multiple sites at once. Sometimes materials are delivered to intermediate warehouses before reaching the final site. It's just logistics, nothing more." His explanation made sense, but something in his tone left me uneasy. Richard had always been transparent with me about every operational aspect of the company. Why did he suddenly seem evasive? It was Carmen who brought the first concrete evidence that something was terribly wrong. During a visit to the housing complex where her parents lived, Carmen photographed significant cracks in the exterior walls, water leaks causing mold in apartments, and structural problems that clearly violated federal building codes. "Mr. Mitchell," she said, showing me the photos on her tablet, "this building was inaugurated just 2 years ago. How can it be in such poor condition? My parents told me several families are experiencing health issues because of the mold, and the kids have developed respiratory problems." The photos were shocking. Those apartments, which should have been built with high-quality materials as specified in our federal contracts, were clearly constructed with second-rate materials. The cracks in the walls pointed to foundation issues, and the leaks suggested poor waterproofing. "Carmen," I said, trying to keep my composure, "I need you to be very discreet about this. We're going to investigate internally before causing any unnecessary alarm. There might be technical explanations we're not seeing." But I already knew there weren't any innocent explanations. 25 years of experience in construction had taught me how to recognize when numbers weren't telling the whole story. I began my own investigation, quietly accessing accounts and systems Richard had always entrusted to me.
What I discovered in the following weeks made me physically ill, and it wasn't just the chemotherapy. Sunshine Development was running a sophisticated scheme of overbilling and substandard materials. In the reports sent to the Department of Housing and Urban Development, we claimed to be using top-tier materials with corresponding costs. In reality, we were purchasing cheap, low-quality supplies and pocketing the difference. Even more shocking was discovering the offshore bank account in the Cayman Islands. While searching the company's digital files, I found references to transfers made to an account named Blackwood Holdings LLC at the Cayman National Bank. Using a password Richard had given me years ago for emergencies, I accessed the banking records and found that this account held over $40 million. $40 million. Money that should have been used to ensure families like Carmen's parents had safe and dignified housing. Federal money, paid by American taxpayers, diverted to fund the luxurious lifestyle of the family I had considered my own.
I confronted Carmen with what I had found, knowing she deserved to know the truth about the company she worked for and about the conditions her own parents were living in. Her reaction was utter devastation. "Mr. Mitchell," she said, tears streaming down her face, "my parents believe they were living in an apartment built with dignity. They feel proud to live in a sunshine development project. How am I supposed to explain to them that the company I work for is responsible for putting their lives at risk?" I decided Carmen should try a subtle approach with Richard, pretending her discoveries were just technical concerns that needed clarification. Maybe, I thought naively, there was an explanation I hadn't seen. Maybe Richard didn't fully know what was happening. "Mr. Blackwood," Carmen said during a meeting, "while reviewing some reports, I noticed discrepancies between the materials listed in our federal contracts and the materials being delivered. Could you help me understand these records?" Richard's reaction was immediate and brutal. The next day, Carmen was fired. Professional incompetence was the official reason. Inability to comprehend basic accounting procedures was written in her termination file. "Harold," Richard told me when he came to explain the dismissal, "Carmen was creating unnecessary problems, questioning procedures that have been in place for years, inventing discrepancies where there are none. You know how it is. Young accountants sometimes want to impress by stirring things up. It was better to let her go before she caused more confusion." At that moment, everything became crystal clear. Richard knew exactly what was going on. Not only did he know, he was deliberately orchestrating it. Firing Carmen was a clear message. Questioning the company's operations was unacceptable, regardless of how legitimate the concerns were. My health was deteriorating quickly. Doctors had reduced my life expectancy to 4 to 6 months, and I was spending more time in the hospital than at home. During one of my prolonged stays, I returned unexpectedly to the office to retrieve some documents and ended up overhearing a conversation that completely shattered my perception of the Blackwood family. Richard, Victoria, and Marcus were in my office, assuming I was still in the hospital. Hidden behind the slightly open door, I heard Richard say, "When Harold dies, and the doctors say it won't be long, we're going to need to do a full cleanup of the files. He had access to too much information about our old operations." "Dad's right," Marcus agreed. "Harold was always very detail-oriented. He probably has records of everything stored somewhere. We need to make sure any evidence is destroyed before anyone starts asking questions." Victoria, always the practical one, suggested, "Let's hire a new accountant, someone more flexible, someone who understands that some business operations require discretion. Harold was always too rigid with regulations." In that moment, I realized that for 25 years, I hadn't just been a loyal employee, I had been a useful idiot. My reputation for integrity and precision had served as the perfect cover for fraudulent operations. When Richard publicly praised me as the guardian of our financial integrity, he had been grotesquely ironic. But hearing my own family planning to destroy evidence as soon as I died was the final catalyst I needed. If they thought my death would mark the end of the documentation of their crimes, they were dead wrong. In my final months, I devised a meticulous plan. I secretly began compiling all the evidence of the fraudulent scheme: original contracts with HUD, falsified invoices, records of the transfers to the Cayman Islands, photos of the buildings in disrepair, recorded testimonies from families affected by the faulty constructions. Carmen, even after being fired, agreed to help me. "Mr. Mitchell," she said, "those families deserve justice. My parents deserve justice. If you have a way to make sure the people responsible are accountable, I'll help no matter what the consequences." Together, we created an automated system that would send all the evidence to the FBI, the Department of Housing and Urban Development, the Miami Herald, and the U.S. Attorney's Office exactly 48 hours after my death. Carmen set up a delayed email system, and I recorded a detailed video confession outlining the entire scheme and my unwitting role in it. I also prepared individual letters for the affected families, explaining the situation and guiding them on how to seek compensation and relocation. I wanted them to know someone cared about what they had endured, even if that someone would already be dead when they read the letters. Richard, Victoria, and Marcus suspected nothing. They continued visiting me in the hospital, pretending to be a concerned family, while secretly planning the cleanup of the records that would begin the day of my funeral. Marcus even brought flowers and said, "Uncle Harold, you've always been an example of integrity to me. I'll never forget everything you taught me about doing the right thing." The irony was almost unbearable.
I died on a Tuesday, November 14th, 2023, at 3:47 a.m. at Baptist Hospital of Miami. My final conscious moments were spent mentally reviewing every detail of the plan I had crafted. Carmen was by my side, holding my hand, knowing that in exactly 48 hours the entire criminal scheme of the Blackwood family would be exposed to the public. The funeral was exactly as I had predicted, a perfect performance of grief and tribute. Richard arranged an elegant ceremony at Riverside Memorial Chapel, with expensive flowers and a mahogany casket that cost more than many families make in a year. The irony was that the money likely came from the funds stolen from the housing projects. Richard gave a moving speech about my unwavering dedication to the company's social projects and my exemplary integrity that served as a model for all of us. Victoria shed what appeared to be genuine tears, and Marcus spoke about how I had been a mentor and second father to him. Some important clients attended, as well as HUD representatives who had always praised my meticulous financial reporting. Carmen was there, quietly positioned at the back of the chapel. Our eyes met during Richard's speech, and she gave a subtle nod. The plan was in motion. In less than 2 days, the entire charade would be exposed. After the funeral, the Blackwoods returned immediately to business. The very next morning, they were already in my old office, beginning what they called file organization. Richard had hired a company that specialized in document destruction, claiming it was routine cleanup of old records to make room for the new accountant. "Let's start with the digital files," Richard instructed Marcus. Harold had passwords to practically everything. Luckily, he gave me all the main access credentials during his illness. Let's delete anything that could be misinterpreted by future auditors. Victoria was overseeing the destruction of physical documents. "These contracts from 2015 onward could be problematic," she said, flipping through file boxes. "Harold documented everything excessively. Let's make sure only the essential documents are kept." Marcus was in charge of accessing offshore bank accounts and transferring the remaining funds to even more secret accounts. "Dad, we need to move at least $30 million today. Once the new accountant takes over, we won't have this level of discreet access anymore." They worked methodically throughout the day on Thursday, November 16th, destroying evidence and reorganizing financial records. That night, they celebrated with champagne in Richard's office, toasting what they believed to be a flawless transition and the successful erasure of any trace of their crimes. Harold was loyal until the end. Even knowing he was dying, he never questioned our operations, a true soldier. To Harold Mitchell, the man who took our secrets to the grave. They had no idea their words were being recorded by the office's surveillance system, a system I had secretly configured to document any suspicious activity after my death. On Friday, November 17th, at exactly 3:47 a.m., 48 hours after my death, the automated system Carmen and I had created activated. The first email was sent to Special Agent Michael Torres of the FBI in Miami, containing all the evidence of the fraudulent scheme.
forged contracts, offshore banking records, photographs of buildings in disrepair, and a copy of my video confession. The subject line was straightforward: Federal fraud evidence, Sunshine Development, urgent action required. Simultaneously, identical copies were sent to the regional director of HUD, the investigative desk at the Miami Herald, the Office of the U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of Florida, and a dozen civil rights organizations representing low-income families. My video confession began like this: "My name is Harold Mitchell, and if you're watching this video, it means I finally found the courage to do the right thing. For 25 years, I was an unwitting accomplice to one of the largest housing fraud schemes in Miami's history. Now, even in death, I will ensure that justice is done." The video detailed every aspect of the scheme: how lower-quality materials were systematically used instead of the ones specified in federal contracts, how the saved money was funneled into offshore accounts, how entire families were living in dangerous conditions while the Blackwoods raked in millions in fraudulent profits. At 6:30 a.m. on Friday, as Richard sipped coffee in his Key Biscayne mansion, Agent Torres called FBI headquarters to request emergency search and seizure warrants. By 7:15, a full investigative team was being assembled. By 8 o'clock, Miami Herald reporters were actively verifying the evidence they had received. Richard arrived at the Sunshine Development office at 9 a.m., completely unaware of the storm about to hit. He found Marcus already working, finalizing the last of the wire transfers. "Great job, son," Richard said. "In a few weeks, once we hire the new accountant, we can start fresh with a clean slate." Harold took all our problems to the grave. At 9:23 a.m., 47 federal agents raided the Sunshine Development office and the Blackwood residence simultaneously. Richard was signing papers when he saw armed agents burst through the front door. His first reaction was total confusion. "There must be some mistake," he told Agent Torres. "We're a reputable company. We just lost our chief accountant, Harold Mitchell. He could clear up any misunderstanding." "Mr. Blackwood," Agent Torres replied, "Harold Mitchell is exactly the reason we're here. He left the FBI a very special gift." The look on Richard's face when he realized what was happening was indescribable. 25 years of carefully hidden crimes had been exposed by the man he trusted most and had completely underestimated. Victoria was arrested at home in the middle of hosting a charity luncheon for underprivileged families. Marcus was caught trying to delete digital files at the office, his hands trembling as federal agents seized computers and hard drives. Carmen watched the arrests unfold on television, knowing that she had finally brought justice to her family and hundreds of others who had been deceived. The tears in her eyes weren't of sorrow, but of relief. I had done it. Even in death, I had made sure the truth came to light. The FBI operation was devastating for the Blackwood family. In a single morning, they lost everything: the company, their reputation, their freedom, and the $40 million they had stolen over 2 decades. The Miami Herald headlines were merciless. "Miami developer diverts $40 million in federal funds. Poor families lived in unsafe buildings while executives got rich." The trial lasted 8 months and became one of the most heavily documented housing fraud cases in Florida's history. The evidence I compiled was so thorough that the defense attorneys could barely dispute the facts. The confession video I recorded was played in full during the trial, leaving a deep emotional impact on the jury. Richard Blackwood was sentenced to 25 years in federal prison for fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy. At 70, he would likely die behind bars. Victoria received 20 years for her active involvement in the scheme, and Marcus was sentenced to 15 years for his role in managing the offshore accounts. Carmen entered witness protection and was awarded $2 million by the federal government for her bravery in exposing the scheme. She used part of the money to pursue a master's degree in forensic auditing and now works for the Department of Housing and Urban Development, ensuring similar schemes are detected before they cause harm. My cats, Newton and Pascal, were adopted by Carmen, who promised to care for them the way I did. She told me later that they adjusted well to their new home, and that Newton developed the habit of sleeping on top of accounting books as if he knew where he came from. The Sunshine Development case led to the creation of new federal oversight protocols for housing projects. Surprise audits are now conducted regularly, and independent accountants are required to physically verify the quality of materials used in construction. My death ended up saving thousands of future families from becoming victims of similar schemes. The company was dissolved and its assets auctioned off to compensate the victims. The building that once housed its office was turned into a community center for low-income families, an irony I would consider fitting. My name was honored by the FBI with a commemorative plaque for exceptional service in exposing crimes against public housing. Carmen attended the ceremony and said I would have been proud to know that in the end, my life had true meaning. Sometimes doing the right thing requires finding courage you didn't know you had. It took me 55 years and a death sentence to understand that blind loyalty can be the greatest betrayal of all. A betrayal of your own conscience and of the people who most need our protection. The sweetest revenge isn't fueled by hatred, but by a pursuit of justice for those who cannot defend themselves. My death became the beginning of a dignified life for hundreds of families who deserved far better than what I allowed them to receive during 25 years of willful blindness. Harold Mitchell died, but his conscience finally woke up.